truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Friday, May 31st, 2024, the 1227th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. When you become a paid subscriber, you get the ad-free experience. You get to participate in the conversation on Substack, and you get to join in the interactive live streams every Wednesday afternoon. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't, or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast on Substack, on a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'm your moderator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. So now is the part of the show where I say, all right, guys, it is a dark day in American history. I don't know what we're going to do now. It was bad before, but now it's so much worse. We should all be scared. We should all hold hands. We should all say, oh, I never thought it would happen here. But yeah, you did. Or at least we did. Or at least I did. We've been talking about this now for 4 years on this show, and I'm sure that many of you were far ahead of me back in 2020, so you've been talking about stuff like this for years, or maybe even decades. But today we have the uniparty left talking about how our justice system functioned exactly the way it's supposed to function, and it has produced a just outcome, finally holding accountable this awful man, Donald Trump, that just won't go away. And then we have the uniparty right media, which many people still think is our side, talking about how it's a dark day. They never thought it could come to this. Well, the only way you could think that or say something like that and have people not immediately recognize you to be lying is if you have spent 3.5 years systematically convincing those people that our elections aren't rigged and stolen, that all of our institutions are functioning as they should be. And in fact, they might be functioning better if not for Donald Trump and spreaders of disinformation and all those MAGA extremists tearing them down while Donald Trump is in office. Well, now they're discovering, oh man, maybe there's something wrong with our institutions. It's a dark day. I never thought that something like this could happen in America, where an illegitimate authoritarian dictatorial regime who had seized power through obviously false, rigged and stolen elections could ever go and prosecute a political opponent and then find him guilty on all of these trumped up charges. What's next? Are they going to put him in jail? Well, yeah. I mean, that's what we've been talking about this whole time. I mean, the story's gotten this far. You're going to get the rest of it. And if people still aren't awake after that, well, you're going to get another stolen election. And if people still aren't awake after that, well, what fresh horrors might we see? But today is no darker than yesterday. Yesterday, we were joking around about the possibility. Then by the end of the episode, we found out that, yes, there was going to be a narrative about Donald Trump, the convicted felon. Donald Trump headed to jail. We got those conversations all week. We were told that people around Trump, the Secret Service, they were figuring out how this would work if Donald Trump had to be hauled off to jail. Is it a dark day, or are millions and millions and millions of people finally coming to grips with what all of us have been saying for a very long time? Your country is not how you believe it to be. It is not what you were told it was. You do, in fact, have to reckon with the total illegitimacy of our system, top to bottom. Trump came out and spoke today. We're going to get to some more of that later, but I want to just frame the conversation with this short clip.
This is a case where if they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone.
That's how his speech began, and that's the point of this. People have to understand that their government is not of, by, and for the people. It does not exist to protect you. It exists on behalf of foreign entities to control you. If that wasn't the case, you wouldn't be subjected to constant surveillance, censorship, propaganda, financial manipulation, moral degradation, crime. And they wouldn't spend countless hours attempting to convince you that you actually want everything they do. And in fact, you voted for it in free and fair elections. Now, I'm not suggesting that the government is the source of all evil or that evil would not exist but for this government. But it does remain true that the government is thoroughly infiltrated, thoroughly corrupted, thoroughly evil, and exists to exploit the people. That lesson must be learned, but it didn't just become true yesterday. Every new pair of eye that opens to that reality is a step in the right direction from our point of view. So yesterday was a huge step in the right direction. Now, if this is a depressing reminder that we are still under those conditions, so be it. I understand why that might be frustrating or why it might be upsetting, but you're going to have to get over it. And you will today or tomorrow or next week, and you'll be fine. People are claiming that we need to be extra patient and extra sensitive with the people just coming to this realization. And to that I say, no, we don't. We've been waiting for these people to take just the tiniest amount of responsibility or accountability for this situation for years now. We certainly don't have to keep treating them with patience and adjusting our response in order to validate their feelings. And I'm not saying that you should be a jerk to your wife or your husband or your cousin or whatever. I'm saying that you should not reflect back to them their own fear and confusion. You should simply stand in the truth you know and say, yeah, Kami, this is what I've been trying to tell you for years. What did you think it meant when people were being censored and locked up for their political opinions? And I know you didn't agree with the things that they were saying, and at the time you thought they were saying very dangerous things, and that's why you were promoting the obvious violation of their human rights and constitutional rights. Congratulations on now figuring out that something like that could happen. I think maybe some people kind of understand where we are, but maybe it wasn't just right up in their faces the same way it used to be. Maybe they've just come to terms with it in some sort of way. This was just one of those little jolts, a reminder that maybe this problem is something more complicated than we can fix by just hitting different parts of an iPad screen attached to a black box once every couple of years. And I get that. This whole period is kind of about figuring out how to be comfortable walking by faith rather than by sight. There's that old adage about Cortez when he reached the New World, commanding his men to burn their ships behind them so that there would be no way back. This is where we are right now. Everything behind us is gone. We go this direction and we make it work. This is the process of burning those boats. Maybe the gravity of the situation is just hitting you. Maybe you're having second thoughts. Maybe you think you just can't go any further. That's why you burn the boats. You commit, you understand. There are no outs. There is only one way forward. But a lot of people already burned their boats before yesterday, before today. A lot of people have anticipated these moments for a long time and they've prepared for them. It's a good reminder that we have to be prepared for undesirable outcomes with our physical circumstances, the supplies we need to get through a time of crisis, but also our emotional preparedness. We need to examine the options in front of us and take them seriously, even when they're things we don't want or things we think are unlikely. This is why we spend so much time on potential possibilities and why we try to root things in sound logic based only on that which we know to be true as a product of pure reason. Not because we've seen enough evidence through media channels or because an expert told us. It is the difference between saying there is no evidence of widespread election fraud enough to have overturned the outcome and saying actually there is no evidence anywhere that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. Consider the set of people who believe the one claim versus the other claim. Which one of those sets of people is prepared for the situation we find ourselves in? A lot of people are out there calling this a dark day. I'm not going to do it because we've already seen darker days. I had a dark day when I found myself banned from social media platforms for saying things I knew to be true in front of people with a whole lot of influence. That was a pretty dark day. It was a pretty dark day when the TV told me that Joe Biden had won the election, when everyone could see that it was stolen right out in the open. Trump literally told us on the night of the election what was going to happen. There were dark days throughout 2021 and throughout 2022. But we are seeing the same playbook that has been run by this regime over and over and over again in country after country after country. There's never much question about what's coming in the future. It's just a matter of whether or not there is a force powerful enough to stop it. And the force committed to stopping it just grew in a major way yesterday. Now I know there's some kind of celebration happening among all those pitiful little demons who still support the uniparty and support the institutions above all else. These people love their position within the party of false decorum. They are happy with the incentive and punishment structure, because that allows people like them to succeed. They're not celebrating because they have made an objective assessment about how justice has finally won out. They're celebrating because they think this might allow them to hold on to power, and the display of their celebration says to normal people out there that this result is real and it's unquestionable, and this is what happens if you mess with the machine. They want that message out there because they want people to stop messing with the machine. This is a projection of abstract power. They want everyone to know that this could happen to them so that no one will ever put it to the test. No one will call their bluff. If people did call their bluff, if people refused to comply, refused to be cowed, it would become quickly visible that there's actually nothing behind this. And over the course of the next few weeks and few months, we are going to see exactly that. Now, those people aren't interested in waking up. They are interested in preserving the society exactly the way it is now. They don't care about the system being corrupt because it protects the servants of the system, which is a perk for being a servant of the system. And so as long as they maintain their value to the system, they will be taken care of. That's the calculation. Those people aren't going to wake up. If they are cheering for Donald Trump being found guilty of a crime they can't describe, they're not going to make it. We have been through a series of these moments over the last few years. Each one of these moments is an opportunity for people like that to humble themselves and wake up even a little bit and say, okay, this is going too far. Each time we go through one of these sifting moments, people choose whether or not to double down, whether or not to continue in that direction. And many people have chosen to continue. Each and every time they do that, the chances that they are going to somehow have a revelation, wake up and make it out of that, decrease. But let's put that aside and focus on all those people who finally said yesterday, enough is enough. Now, I want to be clear that every time that happens, I'm happy about it. That is what the purpose of all of this is. But I want to make a distinction between the people who are going through that process at great personal expense, whether it's emotional or financial or just the level of humility they have to express because they've mistreated some of the people closest to them and finally realize now they're holding themselves accountable for being wrong. That is a journey of spiritual and personal growth that will be incredibly rewarding for them. And it absolutely sucks now, of course, but hopefully they'll make it through that and then try to correct for a lot of the things they've supported or try to be just a better person in their family or their friend group, be more honest, whatever it is. But there's also a set of fence riders who will continue to move gradually in our direction, making sure that they have the right position as each one of these issues advances. And the truth is they're making the same calculation as the people on MSNBC. They understand that the only way they can preserve their position in society, their reputation, etc., is to advance in our direction, but within that confined space, within that bubble that exists around the central narrative in the party of false decorum. People who will say things like, yeah, that trial really was rigged against Trump. But the truth is, I can't imagine America electing a convicted felon. And therefore, we really should look at potentially replacing Donald Trump with Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or someone else. We're going to see that group of people saying all the right things about the Trump trial, but then misleading about where that should go in order to protect their position as it's been these last few years, while they have, for instance, claimed to believe that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. So what I'm saying is there's a group of people saying enough is enough. Some of them actually mean it in a deep personal way, like they have come to the end of their rope trying to cover for the regime, for the corruption, for Biden, for the justice system, pursuing Donald Trump, maybe supporting the censorship against their fellow Americans. And they understand what they've done. They've had enough. Now they're out. That is an entirely different enough is enough than we're getting from figures in Con Inc. media or people in prominent corporate positions or establishment Republican politicians coming out and saying enough is enough. Donald Trump does not deserve to be treated this way. So an important distinction, because not everybody who's saying, enough is enough, I've had it, is actually experiencing some major personal advancement. But there are people doing that. So let's focus on them for a minute, because they just experienced shock therapy, and sometimes that's what it takes. That's kind of what it took for me. It took Trump winning in 2016, and I started taking seriously the quote-unquote other side. I wanted to figure out what it was that Republicans actually believed, that conservatives believed. I knew that they couldn't be totally wrong about everything, and I knew that my information sources were clearly failing me because I thought Hillary had it all locked up. And so over the course of the next few years, I kept learning and realizing, oh, maybe there's something to this other side. Maybe they have a few points on this or that or the other thing. But I still wasn't on board with Donald Trump. And then COVID happened and everything shut down. And I started watching the man every day and realizing that every other source of information was lying about what that man said. And I witnessed that as I was realizing, oh, wait. They just shut down my 15-year career, and it might not come back. They said 2 weeks to slow the spread, and it's been 8 weeks. And then I started saying, hey, everybody, I think that they're lying about this man. And I'm not so sure that they're telling the truth about this whole pandemic thing. And then I found out, whoops, apparently you're not allowed to say these kinds of things online. And I lost my reputation and a whole bunch of people I thought were my friends. It was just one thing after the other. Shock, 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 shock. And it takes however many it takes to get you where you need to be. And there's a lot of people out there who just felt that for the first time. Now, there are people on our side who still feel those little shocks. And each time you feel one, it's a smaller reaction than the last time. You already know you're going to get through it. A couple days will pass. You will realize that your world is mostly unchanged, and you will figure out how to press forward. But a lot of people just got their first real shock therapy yesterday. And we might even be feeling the repercussions of them getting shocked. The public conversation among standard issue villagers reaches a frenzied pitch. And we just naturally think, oh, there must be something to this. I guess we should get really worried as well. But no, you shouldn't. You're supposed to be used to this so that you can provide the example for other people. You're chillin'. You are as strong a Trump supporter as there is, and you're chillin'. Why? Because we expected this now for years. We already saw the dark day. We don't need to call each new example a dark day. The whole point is to provide a path out of the emotional abuse inflicted by this information warfare, which means you don't engage in the frenzy, because the frenzy is the desired reaction from the regime, and you don't give that to them. We need to get to the point where the things they do have virtually no effect, and we just continue to march forward. So let's try to take a comprehensive look at this full narrative as it has been delivered to us from the mainstream media, get some of the reaction, think about what it all means. This is from yesterday in the New York Times, the Trump Manhattan criminal verdict, count by count. So they're going to lay down all 34 counts. It's so interesting. Count 1, guilty, related to an invoice dated February 14th, 2017. Count 2, guilty, related to a ledger entry dated February 14th, 2017. And it just goes on like this for 34 counts. Apparently that makes it feel more dramatic. Read through each one of these. Related to a ledger entry, related to a check, related to a check, related to an invoice. Oh, he falsified so many documents in this grand conspiracy. Naturally, there have been all sorts of opinion pieces talking about how dark a day it is, talking about the historical nature of this verdict, the first time an American president has ever been convicted of a crime. But I think this is like the flagship article. This is the official version of the official story from the paper of record, the old gray lady, the New York Times, the paper that is so much the paper of record that everything they ever print is 100% true. Trump convicted on all counts to become America's first felon president. This article is written by 6 people: Ben Protess, Jonah Bromwich, Maggie Haberman, Kate Christobeck, Jesse McKinley, and William K. Rashbaum. Jesse McKinley also has his own editorial with the headline, "Guilty and History is Made." But let's get into the one where he needed the help of 5 other people. Donald Trump was convicted on Thursday of falsifying records to cover up a sex scandal that threatened to derail his 2016 presidential campaign, capping an extraordinary trial that tested the resilience of the American justice system and transformed the former commander-in-chief into a felon. The guilty verdict in Manhattan, across the board on all 34 counts, will reverberate throughout the nation and the world as it ushers in a new era of presidential politics. Mr. Trump will carry the stain of the verdict during his 3rd run for the White House, as voters now choose between an unpopular incumbent and a convicted criminal. Well, okay, you're welcome to put it that way, New York Times. I don't know if anyone noticed, but last week there were headlines about how Ashley Biden had confirmed, "Oh yeah, that is my diary." And she's talking, of course, about that diary in which she describes having to take inappropriate showers with her father. But sure, it'll be a bigger burden to carry the convicted felon label through a fake election campaign. While it was once unthinkable that Americans would elect a felon as their leader, Mr. Trump's insurgent behavior delights his supporters as he bulldozes the country's norms. Now, the man who refused to accept his 2020 election loss is already seeking to delegitimize his conviction, attempting to assert the primacy of his raw political power over the nation's rule of law. Wait a second. Do you mean Democratic power? You mean he's going to try to win an election where the people would vote for him and elect him in our very, very real elections? I think that that's what they're saying. And if that could be the case, if more than half the country wants Donald Trump to be president, even after he's a convicted felon, then what would that say about the system that convicted him? And if that is his political power, how is he holding it over the nation's rule of law, since the nation's law would not prevent him from becoming president again? It's as though they think that now that he is a convicted felon, everyone just has to agree that he can't be president, no matter what the law says. As Mr. Trump learned his fate on Thursday, he showed little emotion, shutting his eyes and slowly shaking his head, while a hush descended over the courtroom. But when he emerged, holding his jaw tense, the former president spoke to the assembled television cameras. He declared that the verdict was a disgrace, and with a somber expression proclaimed, "The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people," referring to Election Day. The judge overseeing the case, Juan Merchan, released Mr. Trump on his own recognizance and set his sentencing for July 11th, just days before the Republican National Convention convenes and anoints him as the presidential nominee. Ah, yes, that's what's happening. They're just anointing him. He didn't actually win that nomination through a series of fake primary wins. He's just being anointed. When something benefits Trump, it is unjust. It is a cheat of the system. And when something harms Trump, that is the system working properly, according to these people. I'm not rephrasing what they're saying. This is what they say. So Trump will be sentenced just days before the convention. The convention that, so we've heard, will be contested in some way by the GOP establishment. Now, is all of that going to be a big show? Probably. But could they choose someone else to run? Of course they could. And we've talked about this scenario many times. The point is not simply to beat Democrats. It's to expose the fact that we deal with a uniparty and defeat the uniparty. It's not Republicans versus Democrats. It's MAGA versus the uniparty. If the uniparty wants to further expose itself through the GOP establishment choosing to run someone other than Donald Trump, well, then that's just fine. Trump can run as an independent and we will still win in any legitimate election scenario. And if the election is not legitimate, and right now there would be absolutely no justification for believing it is or would be or could be, then the result doesn't matter in the first place. What matters ultimately is the court of public opinion, what the consensus of the people eventually decide about Donald Trump. And I have absolutely no doubt, I have never doubted it, that the people will come to side with Donald Trump, or at least they will side with MAGA, regardless of Trump's status or how they feel about Trump. The country will unify, and it is going to unify around MAGA principles. Let's continue. Alvin L. Bragg, the prosecutor who brought the case, declined to reveal Thursday whether he would seek a prison term. The judge could put Mr. Trump behind bars for up to 4 years, but the former president could receive probation instead and may never see the inside of a prison cell. His appeal could drag on for months or more, and he will remain free to campaign for the presidency while he awaits his punishment. Punishment. As if he is a small child. The 12 New Yorkers who composed the jury needed nearly 10 hours to decide a case stemming from Mr. Trump's first White House run, when prosecutors say he perpetrated a fraud on the American people. The case, colored by tabloid intrigue, secret payoffs, and an Oval Office pact that echoed the Watergate era, spotlighted months of scheming that begot a hush money payment to a porn star and a plot to falsify documents to bury all trace of that deal. They are taking quite a few liberties with the truth there. Guilty, the jury foreman declared into a microphone 34 times, one for each false record, before he and his fellow jurors, whose names were withheld from the public for their safety, filed out of the lower Manhattan courtroom. Over weeks of testimony, the jury had met a varied cast of characters, including a tabloid maestro, a campaign spokeswoman, and the porn star, Stormy Daniels. Their testimony built up to an epic showdown between the men at the heart of the case. Mr. Trump, a real estate mogul turned reality television impresario who exported his smash-mouth instincts to presidential politics, and the star witness against him, Michael D. Cohen, the do-anything fixer whose loyalty he lost. Ah, yes, Donald Trump lost the loyalty of Michael Cohen, the man who admitted to actually stealing from Trump in this trial. This article is actually quite long. By all means, read it if you want. I wanted to give you a flavor of how the official story was being presented. Here is the end of that article. Mr. Blanche argued that Mr. Trump had signed the checks without paying them much mind, and that Mr. Cohen was responsible for the invoices. But the prosecution highlighted evidence that portrayed Mr. Trump as a micromanager who would never miss that sort of detail, including Mr. Trump's own books, which contained a chapter called How to Pinch Pennies, and the advice, quote, always question invoices. So that means he's guilty, you see. The criminal conviction capped a brutal stretch of legal defeats for Mr. Trump in New York. He started the year in a federal courthouse where a jury found him liable for defaming the writer E. Jean Carroll when he claimed he hadn't sexually abused her, and ordered him to pay her more than $80 million. So for claiming that he didn't sexually abuse a woman who he did not sexually abuse, he owes that woman $80 million. Yeah, there's no way we could have seen this conviction coming. That wasn't a dark day when the court said, yes, Donald Trump sexually abused this woman who claims everyone sexually abuses her and has no memory whatsoever of when this sexual abuse occurred. And oh yeah, he owes $80 million for saying that he didn't do those things to that crazy lady. Could have never seen this coming. Oh yeah, and then there was that whole time where in another New York court, they decided that Donald Trump owed $500 million for signing off on estimates of his properties created by his accountants to be included in loan applications to banks, where the banks had the duty to assess the properties themselves. The loans were granted, the loans were paid back at profit, and all the properties have gone up in value, but Trump owes $500 million for that. Yeah, I could have never seen this guilty verdict coming. It is totally a dark day. While those cases delivered devastating personal financial blows, only Mr. Bragg's trial could send the former president to prison and America into an era of uncertainty. This is long from over, Mr. Trump declared on Thursday, minutes after his conviction. And it's hilarious. At the end of that New York Times article, it lists another 2 writers as having contributed to that article. Now, here's the part where you hear some of the reaction from the communists. So if this is going to trigger you, steel yourself and prepare for the incoming shock therapy. Here is Alvin Bragg.
From a fundamental civic duty, their service is literally the cornerstone of our judicial system. We should all be thankful for the careful attention that this jury paid to the evidence and the law and their time and commitment over these past several weeks. 12 everyday New Yorkers, and of course our alternates, heard testimony from 22 witnesses, including former and current employees of the defendant, media executives, book publishers, custodians of records, and others. They reviewed call logs, text messages, and emails. They heard recordings. They saw checks and invoices, bank statements, and calendar appointments. This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In the 1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey ushered in the era of the modern, independent professional prosecutor. For now nearly 90 years, dedicated professionals in this office have built upon that fine tradition. A major part of our practice during that nearly 90 years has been public integrity work, including cases involving jurists, local and state electeds, public servants, and others. I want to thank this phenomenal prosecution team, embodying the finest traditions.
So the jurors are very heroic. That's what all of this comes down to. There is a fine tradition in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and Alvin Bragg is just simply continuing that tradition. Thomas Dewey had a long and illustrious career. I haven't dug into him before, but there's a lot of interesting stuff there. In addition to his role as Manhattan DA, he was also New York governor and ran for president a couple times. But Bragg wanted to make clear that the process went as it's intended to go. The jury saw all this evidence, heard from all these different people, and then took their job very, very seriously and delivered this unanimous verdict. Alvin Bragg presented them with a novel legal theory that had never been tried before on crimes out of the statute of limitations, crimes that other prosecutors and even Alvin Bragg refused to prosecute before. The defendant with a gag order, the judge obviously conflicted because his daughter takes massive sums of money from prominent Democrats, Donald Trump's political opponents, but he did not recuse. He would not allow Trump to bring certain witnesses. He would not allow Trump to bring certain evidence or to make certain arguments. And then he told the jurors that they didn't even have to agree about what underlying crime Donald Trump had committed and was trying to cover up, because that wasn't important to this novel legal theory. They just had to know that Donald Trump was guilty of something and trying to cover that something up, which makes him guilty of something else, and therefore he's guilty of all 34 things that are really basically all the same thing. But Bragg gave us a preview of what we were going to hear, one of the main talking points from the media. That is that all of this ran perfectly, smoothly. Evidence was presented. The jury was convinced. Everyone took it all very, very seriously and rendered this guilty verdict. I posted in the morning yesterday on Truth Social that watching legal experts pretend to analyze the fake Trump trial was my favorite thing. And I wrote some quotes of the sort of things that they've been saying. Like, oh, yes, the prosecution has definitely proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. I think I heard James Comey say that a few days ago, and remarked on the focus of how long the jury was spending deliberating, as if that's an indication of how seriously they're taking everything. And so here we have Rachel Maddow.
Listen, it's a unanimous jury verdict, unanimous on all counts. This is a definitive and, this is an irreducible verdict. He can appeal. I'm sure he will appeal. But this is everything that the prosecution asked for from a jury that, by all accounts, took this thing very, very seriously. We counted the deliberation hours down here. The test here for us as a country is not about what happens on appeal and is not about what happens in sentencing. The test for us now as a country is whether or not this former president and his allies will have succeeded in trying to undermine the rule of law so that people reject this as a legitimate function of the rule of law in our country. They have tried to delegitimize this judge. They have tried to delegitimize this court. They have tried to delegitimize these proceedings. They've even tried to delegitimize the laws that he was charged under. Those efforts are the test that we now have as a country. The people involved in bringing this case have been threatened and intimidated and had everything brought to bear on against them in a way that was designed to delegitimize this process in the eyes of the American people. It is now in the hands of the American people to decide if we will accept those efforts or whether we will stand by the rule of law and recognize this as a fair proceeding.
So there you have it. Rachel Maddow, the most serious, very serious intellectual the uniparty left has. She wants you to know that this decision is irreducible. I guess that means there's no way that you can take anything away from it. It is perfect as it is. It is unassailable, so don't even try to challenge it. It is such a good decision that if you try to challenge it, you are sure to fail, so don't even waste your time. No, seriously, please don't waste your time trying to challenge this verdict. Otherwise, people out there might recognize that this verdict is complete and total bullshit. And if they spend too much time on it, they might realize that this whole thing is a charade and their favorite television characters have just been playing along the whole time, knowing it's a charade, but pretending it's real so that the people who pay them can stay in power, despite the fact that they have been involved throughout this entire time with the usurpation of this country and the widespread commission of crimes against America, crimes against humanity, and the total and complete violation of not only the constitutional rights of all Americans, but their human rights as well. So please do not challenge this decision in any way. The jury, as you heard her say, took things very, very seriously. The way that you know that is because it took them a while. They didn't just release their verdict immediately. That would have told everybody that this was some kind of kangaroo court. But it wasn't a kangaroo court. You can know that. The proof is in the fact that it took this jury so long. No kangaroo court would have ever bothered having the jury stick around for an extra day just to convince everyone how serious the proceedings have been. She says the test now is whether or not the president and his people have successfully undermined the rule of law to the point where Americans will not accept this as a legitimate decision. Consider the projection. That is spectacular. It is amazing what these commies are capable of. But she is saying that the only thing that matters is the court of public opinion. Sure, we got this verdict, but will it stick? Will anybody respect this verdict? And the answer, of course, is no. The reason people won't respect this verdict is because they're getting their information from sources that go well beyond MSNBC and Washington Post and the New York Times. You have to understand the central narrative as a small subset of all the information that exists. When you are trying to analyze a situation, when you're trying to make decisions in your life, everyone understands fairly naturally that you're going to make better decisions when you have more information, especially when you have reliable metrics on what constitutes good information versus bad information, true and usable information versus nonsense. And so anyone who gets their information from beyond just these approved sources will understand the illegitimacy of this trial. But it's not because Trump and his allies have spread disinformation and sowed discontent. It's because a bright light has been shined on the media and on our judicial system and on our political system, and how all of this has been rigged to destroy anyone and anything who threatens the power of that regime. These institutions are being delegitimized because they are illegitimate, and the cast of characters on MSNBC has no business to be whining about delegitimization while they are in the middle of attempting to delegitimize the Supreme Court before it releases decisions over the next few weeks. These people are currently engaged in an information operation to delegitimize the Supreme Court right now, and they will have no problem switching their position 180 degrees just a few weeks from now. They don't care at all that the central narrative is self-refuting and doesn't make any sense. It's not required to make sense or be consistent. The only purpose is to have everyone repeating the same things at the same time until that issue goes away and they begin repeating the same things at the same time about something else. An obvious miscarriage of justice on trumped-up charges is the system proving its legitimacy, while the Supreme Court using all of its judges to hand down a decision that these same people don't like is proof of the system's illegitimacy. And then they claim that Trump supporters are the ones who only say the system is legitimate when it benefits them. No, we're the ones here saying the system is clearly not legitimate at all. Check out this corrupt old communist on MSNBC.
Political focus group. You know, in politics, Joe knows this, you know this. You get a dozen people, you set them aside from the rest of the country, you fill them with all the facts, you give them all the information that's relevant to the discussion, and then they give you a verdict about what they think about the candidates. This was a focus group. Aside from the legal factors, it was a focus group of people who got for 21 days all the facts, unmitigated truth of what was going on in this matter, in this case. And they came out with a judgment in a matter of 9 or 10 hours. And so it's really important that a country where 3/5 of the country don't get the news, they don't get the Philadelphia Inquirer, they don't read the Washington Post, the New York Times, the other big papers, they don't get the news. They say things like, well, I didn't hear, TikTok didn't really cover the trial. What? Or I hear that Joe Biden couldn't recite the alphabet. What? This never happened. This stuff never happens to most people. This time, we had a focus group, had all the facts, all the equal facts.
So the jury was a political focus group. They were all given the right set of facts, the equal facts. These are the real, pure, true facts, and they rendered a decision. You see, this is what the country would actually be like if everyone was given nothing but all of the real, true facts. You see, everybody understands that Joe Biden is actually a really great president. In fact, the most popular president of all time. That's what people would believe if they were given all of the real facts, the equal facts, and only those facts. If only MSNBC was on television like all day long, and everyone had access to it, well, then everyone would know their facts, and then everyone would be like this political focus group on the jury, and they would all side unanimously with Chris Matthews and Rachel Maddow and Judge Merchan and Matthew Colangelo from the fake president's illegitimate Department of Justice. That wasn't a kangaroo court. That wasn't a show trial. That judge was fair. There was no bias whatsoever. This was not a targeted political persecution and prosecution. Absolutely all of this was above board, and the whole country would be like this if only people were able to get the pure, true, equal facts all the time. The uniparty left is making the case that everything that happened was totally above board. The jury took this all very seriously. Just look how long they deliberated. They saw all the facts. They saw all these witnesses. They properly understood their instructions, and they delivered a guilty verdict on all counts. All of it, absolutely all of it, is above board, unassailable, irreducible. And the question they pose to their audience, the challenge they pose to their audience, can you go out there and defend the legitimacy of this decision in your conversations with Trump supporters even? Will you stand up and say everything that happened here was done above board? The system worked, and I agree it's a dark day. It's a dark day that the country might elect a convicted felon. It's a dark day that we've ever been put in this situation to begin with, that people would ever elect a man like this to begin with. Wait, I mean, that Russia would help Trump steal the election from Hillary to begin with. The uniparty left says the system worked perfectly. It's a dark day. I hope we can move forward from here. Well, what does the uniparty right say? Well, they say the system worked perfectly. It's a dark day. I hope we can move forward from here. The DeSantis crowd, led by Jenna Ellis in particular, was out there suggesting that Ron DeSantis should be named the candidate. Ellis wrote, two things can be true at once. This is a political verdict, and the GOP shouldn't play rigged games. We should have nominated DeSantis, and we still should nominate DeSantis. And hey, maybe it's all an op, and she's just attracting other rhinos, drawing them out into the light so that they too will say we should choose someone else. Or maybe she's serious. Maybe she thinks they really should choose DeSantis now that Trump has been convicted in a trial that she admits reached a political verdict. But Jenna Ellis is a lawyer and she respects our institutions, so she needs to make it clear that although we are disappointed with the outcome and the political nature of the outcome, this is still how the system works. Sure, it's a dark day, but we need to move forward. We need to move forward with Ron DeSantis. We've talked quite a bit over the last few weeks about former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. He is now Maryland's Republican nominee for Senate. Maryland, you see, has very, very legitimate elections. He weighed in on the verdict last night. He said, regardless of the result, I urge all Americans to respect the verdict and the legal process. At this dangerously divided moment in our history, all leaders, regardless of party, must not pour fuel on the fire with more toxic partisanship. We must reaffirm what has made this nation great, the rule of law. Now that's the sort of Republican you know is going to stand up for American values, conservative values, the values of each and every sovereign individual of the state of Maryland who he represents. Regardless of the verdict, you have to support the system because the system is good. This is the system working. And yes, it's a dark day, but we have to move forward. That's the Never Trump side. That is what you would expect from the Never Trump side, but you also get it from the MAGA-friendly, undercover Never Trump side with people who understand that their image is totally broken apart if they are just overt rhinos willingly supporting this obviously corrupted system. So they need to find a niche where they can be edgy without claiming that the system itself is the problem and that the system itself is illegitimate because, of course, they depend on the system. CNN made sure to publicize some of these statements by some of these figures. Right-wing media figures vow revenge after Trump's conviction. And Oliver Darcy worries a great deal about everyone saying that we might be a banana republic now. No, we're not. There's no evidence of being a banana republic. These are baseless claims. You cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we are a banana republic. Therefore, everything is above board. And yes, it's a dark day, but we've got to move forward. Let's see what Matt Walsh has to say. Well, Matt Walsh took a break from producing trans content 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And Matt Walsh, with his edgy flannel shirts and beard, suggests that Donald Trump should make and publish a list of 10 high-ranking Democrat criminals who he will have arrested when he takes office. So you see, the system is just the system. What we're going to do is start directing all sorts of political prosecutions in the other direction, just because we're mad. That's fighting fire with fire. Just like how the way to solve election fraud that didn't happen is to vote really, really hard, doing whatever Scott Pressler says. You see, the system's okay. The system is not illegitimate. Yes, it's a dark day, but we have to move forward. And the best way to move forward is to show that we're really strong and courageous by typing out on the internet that everybody has to go arrest the Democrats now. You see, that's what it is. It's Republicans versus Democrats. We're going to turn this back around on Democrats. Very tough, very brave. That is the edgy normie take of yesterday. They have set the precedent that will allow all of this in the other direction, and that's what should happen right now. That should be our response, because this is very real. And if they're going to abuse the system, then we need to abuse that same system right back against them. And we will do that for sure in the future, so long as we actually preserve this system. And that is what we have to do. And don't get me wrong. I want to see all of those people held accountable to the fullest possible extent of the law. And it should be clear, as I've said many times, I believe these people are actually guilty of treason. But that does not mean that I think the proper response right now is to have attorneys general and district attorneys across the country file lawsuits against all of these political enemies. And when you see the same solution being proposed by a whole slew of figures who you understand are not true MAGA allies and have opposed Donald Trump and MAGA at virtually every turn over the last 9 years, you should immediately understand that solution as the desired strategy and outcome of the uniparty right. It sounds, and it's meant to sound, like they're ready to stand up and fight, but they aren't. They've been wrong about everything the entire time. Every time it matters, they are in the wrong position. They lead their audiences to make horrendous decisions. At no point have they stood up and accounted for the fact that they helped cover up the theft of our elections and the usurpation of this country. They have promoted the uniparty right agenda at every single turn. If they are proposing a solution, you should assume it's a bad one. And again, I do want to see all those people held accountable, but I definitely do not want that effort to be led by people who constantly oppose MAGA and their preferred officials. But let's get into some responses from people who are smarter than the cast of Daily Wire. Former ambassador, former DNI Rick Grenell, who many people assume will have a large role in Trump's next term, reposted on X, formerly Twitter, a picture of George H.W. Bush, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton from End Wokeness, who said, 10 wars, 0 trials, enough said. Grenell reposted that and wrote, the precedent is set. I fear the Democrats have unleashed chaos. And yes, they have. We have discussed many times that that is what all of this is about. And there was a great post last night on X, formerly Twitter, from an account called Twin Tower City, who said precedents established by President Trump. Presidents and former presidents can be impeached. Presidents and former presidents can be forced to reveal tax and business records. They can lose executive privilege. They can lose attorney-client privilege. They can be forced to release private phone records and text messages. They can have their homes raided by the FBI. They can be subpoenaed by partisan committees. They can be repeatedly indicted and arrested. They can lose their First Amendment right to free speech. They can lose their right to a jury trial. He says vice presidents no longer have the authority to question the validity of disputed electoral votes. He says the losing party no longer has authority to submit contingent electors when results are disputed. And finally, presidents and former presidents don't have presidential immunity. And of course, we are still waiting for the Supreme Court to weigh in on that. I think he's correct about all of that. Everybody wants to see justice done for all of these people who have committed crimes against this country and crimes against humanity. But in order to be able to do that in a way that doesn't create more problems than it solves, we need to reach some critical mass of public understanding about who has done what and what must be done about it, which means we need to understand in principle what all the various crimes are and what that means and how they can be prosecuted and how that process will go. Those precedents need to be set not only in the legal sense, but they need to be set in the public understanding so that when all of this is turned around, the proper conclusions can be reached. People will understand that the system is functioning properly. All of the various outs that the regime would have had as that process evolves will have been eliminated through this process. And what have they gained? What do they expect to gain? I posted about this earlier. What were the regime's desired reactions? Here's what I came up with. Maybe you have your own. Strike fear in the public and silence dissent. Create a reputational punishment paradigm for continuing to support Trump. And of course, by that I mean when people in your social circle, for instance, say things to you like, are you still going to support Trump now that he's a convicted felon? You're going to vote for a convicted felon for president? Oh, I think that's pretty irresponsible of you. These people are looking for a way to make it stop, to make their pain stop. They believe their pain is being caused by Donald Trump and it's being caused by you. They don't understand why their family members and their friends and former friends, why their coworkers continue to believe this terrible thing. Have they all gone crazy? Can't they see how awful Trump is? This time, for sure, they are going to see how awful Trump is. I'm going to tell them he's a convicted felon, and they're going to say, yeah, you're right. This is beyond the pale, and I can't support him anymore. That is what they want. And when you calmly say, oh, come on, Kami, you cannot possibly believe this is going to stop me from supporting Donald Trump, this makes me support him so much harder. Look how many more new people are coming to support him right now. They're trying to make it impossible to say all that without extreme social blowback. But they're not going to get that. So what else? They want to make it so that the public believes that a Donald Trump election victory is impossible. Everybody understands that the country is not going to elect a convicted felon. They'll try to see if they can sell that one. Because, as I often say, if elections are rigged and stolen, then they are only a battle of narratives. Will the public believe that the reported winner could have actually won? If the public believes that it's possible, that's enough. Will calling Trump a convicted felon for 5 months make it possible for the public to believe that Joe Biden, or whoever he's replaced with, could have actually won? Are they going to get that from this? I would say no. And perhaps they thought they could cause Trump to be seen as a non-viable candidate by the GOP establishment and elite, leading to a candidate swap at the convention. Maybe they'll try that. We discussed that earlier. Or maybe the establishment would believe that this gives them enough leverage to put a uniparty right candidate in as Trump's vice presidential running mate. Do you think that this trial achieved any of that for the regime? I would argue it got them none of that. They made zero progress toward any of those goals. They have made the system look more illegitimate than it did before, and they are clarifying in the minds of virtually everyone who the bad guys are. Elon Musk, who announced that he is going to host town halls on X, formerly Twitter, for Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., reposted a post on X, formerly Twitter, from an account called Geiger Capital that said the first felony conviction of a former U.S. president wasn't for the Iraq or Afghanistan wars, illegal CIA coups, drone-striking weddings, or spying on Americans, and his post went on. But you get the picture. Elon responded, indeed, great damage was done today to the public's faith in the American legal system. If a former president can be criminally convicted over such a trivial matter motivated by politics rather than justice, then anyone is at risk of a similar fate. So that's clearly in line with Trump's sentiments earlier. Trump also posted this on Truth Social this morning. My bookkeeper called a legal expense on the tiny description line of the ledger a legal expense, openly paid to my lawyer, at that time a fully accredited one. I was not involved in that designation, but what else would you have called it? It was, in fact, a legal expense. That is the so-called crime. On top of that, I wasn't allowed by the judge to use in any form the standard reliance on counsel defense, advice of counsel. My lawyer at the time did virtually everything on the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement, and I assumed that what he did was correct. I did nothing wrong, and frankly, there was nothing done wrong. NDAs are standard, commonly used, and legal. MAGA 2024, witch hunt. If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. And I really do hope that some of the shock therapy is proving that to people who didn't believe it before. It wasn't enough to see their friends and family or the people they followed online get censored and banned from platforms. It wasn't enough to see their neighbors called domestic terrorists for telling the big lie or for showing up at their children's school board meetings. It wasn't enough to see the false flags like the very violent insurrection, the American Reichstag fire, and the rounding up of people who walked between the velvet ropes through the Capitol. Seeing the invasion of illegal aliens, that's not enough. Funding the fake foreign proxy wars, not enough. Being forced to participate unwillingly in medical experiments, that's not enough. I sincerely hope that some of them will begin to think, okay, if they can convict the president of totally made-up crimes after doing all that other stuff, well, maybe they are the bad guys. Maybe I shouldn't support them anymore. Maybe they'll realize that people being targeted by this regime isn't actually a conspiracy theory. The formal response from the Republican Party, at least among our so-called elected officials in the illegitimate Congress, has been to call for testimony from Alvin Bragg. This is The Hill today. Jim Jordan demands Bragg testimony following Trump hush money guilty verdict. Jim Jordan said Friday he would demand testimony from Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg and other top prosecutors who worked on former President Trump's hush money case. A post on the social platform X, formerly Twitter, from the Judiciary's Weaponization Subcommittee said Jordan would request an appearance from both Bragg and prosecutor Matthew Colangelo for a June 13th hearing on, quote, the unprecedented political prosecution of President Trump. The Hill says that Bragg's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment, but has resisted previous attempts from Jordan to seek his cooperation, including before charges were ever filed in the case. Bragg's team suggested at the time it was Jordan who was inappropriately interfering in the justice system. We will not be intimidated by attempts to undermine the justice process, nor will we let baseless accusations deter us from fairly applying the law, Bragg's office said last year. They noted that Jordan was first seeking information last year detailing the process that brought illegitimate Biden administration DOJ official Matthew Colangelo to the Manhattan District Attorney's office. Jordan writes in the letter, this hearing will examine actions by state and local prosecutors to engage politically motivated prosecutions of federal officials, in particular the recent political prosecution of President Donald Trump by the Manhattan District Attorney's office. So maybe in 2 weeks we will get an episode where Alvin Bragg and Matthew Colangelo participate in what we, for whatever reason, call a congressional hearing. Hopefully Marjorie Taylor Greene will get to go another round with Jasmine Crockett and AOC. I'm sure it will help us achieve justice. Let's hear what the fake president had to say about all of this today. He came out to give a press conference. He talked about a whole range of issues. And of course, he had to make a statement about Donald Trump.
Donald Trump was given every opportunity to defend himself. It was a state case, not a federal case. And it was heard by a jury of 12 citizens, 12 Americans, 12 people like you. Like millions of Americans who served on juries, this jury is chosen the same way every jury in America is chosen. It was a process that Donald Trump's attorney was part of. The jury heard 5 weeks of evidence, 5 weeks. And after careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict They found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts. Now he'll be given the opportunity, as he should, to appeal that decision just like everyone else has that opportunity. That's how the American system of justice works. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Our justice system has endured for nearly 250 years. And it literally is the cornerstone of America, our justice system. The justice system should be respected, and we should never allow anyone to tear it down. It's as simple as that. That's America. That's who we are. And that's who we'll always be, God willing.
So it's a dark day and we must move forward, but the system is very, very legitimate. The legitimacy of the system, in fact, is unquestionable. Donald Trump had his day in court. He had every ability to defend himself. He will have the ability to appeal just like anyone else would. And it is absolutely dangerous to do or say anything that might call into question the legitimacy of our system of justice. In fact, it is the cornerstone, the very foundation of our society, and it always has been. Joe Biden seems to be setting out all the standards that will eventually support his own accountability process and that of all the people around him. All those precedents that have been set, here is Joe Biden declaring all of them legitimate. The system is announcing and promoting its own legitimacy. And he has to, of course, because his son is about to be tried and then almost certainly found not guilty. So you really want to put yourself in a position where no one is questioning the legitimacy. Despite the fact that the illegitimacy of the system, up and down the system, is being proven true by reality no matter how many times you say otherwise. Here is CNN's Caitlin Collins trying to make it not true with Trump's attorney Todd Blanche. This is essentially a televised struggle session like we have seen many times over the years from the hosts on CNN and MSNBC trying to get their guest to admit that what CNN and MSNBC are telling the country is actually the real truth.
You disagree with the outcome, obviously, but do you accept that he did have his day in court and it was a jury of his peers that made this decision?
No, not at all.
Why not?
No, I mean, look, I think, and this is nothing that we haven't said repeatedly. We were indicted for conduct that happened in 2015, 16, 17. In a jurisdiction that it was very hard for us to get a fair trial, Caitlin. I mean, and I know the district attorney has said repeatedly, said it today, this is a bread and butter case. We do this all the time. That is not true. It's just not true. It may be that they bring these types of charges regularly, business records charges, but you cannot find another case in the Manhattan district attorney's, in the history of that office, where they did what they did here, which is charge somebody for conduct that was 7, 8 years old, somebody's personal records, right? Not corporate records, his personal records.
So the focus, of course, on the legitimacy of the proceedings. Does Todd Blanche think the proceedings were legitimate, that Trump got a fair trial? And he says quite clearly no. And of course, that makes him dangerous. So now we'll get stories about how MAGA is threatening the legitimacy of our judicial system and our legal process. All of that is very dangerous. But for anyone who will bow to the struggle session and say, oh, yes, I do think the system was legitimate, and I don't agree with the verdict, I think this is actually a dark day in America, but we must move on, and the system, at all costs, must be preserved. The system can be broken, corrupt, infiltrated, compromised, and produce nothing but the most immoral result possible at all times. But we still have to support it, no matter what. It's dangerous to call our government illegitimate, even though our First Amendment rights say we are allowed to, and the Declaration of Independence, one of our founding documents, suggests that not only do we have the right to do exactly that, it is indeed our duty to do exactly that. And no, bearing some small reputational burden is not reason to avoid that duty, nor are the regime's threats for punishment. Let's get back to our totally illegitimate president. This is how his press conference ended. You'll hear a moment of silence. That is Joe Biden just walking away slowly from the reporters, from the press conference. They ask a question that finally gets his attention, and so he turns around about halfway, looking over his shoulder, and he just gives that winning Joe Biden smile. I think you'll be able to tell what moment that is.
For the day after to begin. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response to that, sir? Do you think the conviction will have an impact on the campaign? We'd love to hear your thoughts, sir.
Should he be on the ballot, sir?
Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response? Turn halfway around, like you might actually answer the question, smile real big, and then keep shuffling away. So in Trump's speech today, he came out, he talked for about 30 some odd minutes, and he went through a lot of what he's been discussing in his appearances after leaving the courthouse each day. He'll mention some of the issues our country faces, the crime in these cities, the illegal alien invasion. Why aren't those crimes being prosecuted? Why aren't those issues being dealt with? Why is all the time and money being spent attempting to prosecute the quote-unquote former president and interfering in a quote-unquote election? Why are all of these abuses of the system required when Joe Biden was the most popular president in American history and he's doing such a great job? Trump went into examples of many of the various forms of corruption involved in this case, highlighting them for everyone. Once again, we discussed a bunch of those and how they've set precedents. We've seen issues like Merchan's refusal to recuse put up against Alito's refusal to recuse. We've seen him highlight advice of counsel. I think we will probably hear more in the future about the jury selection process. Trump also wondered aloud where all of the money funding these Democrat efforts is coming from. And I imagine we'll find out. He highlighted his massive funding haul over the last 24 hours. According to reports this morning, he had already pulled in $34.8 million. It has certainly gone up from there. We heard stories yesterday about how Trump's donation site had crashed due to overwhelming traffic. There was an article published in the Daily Mail today. The headline on that, Donald Trump gets a 6-point bump in approval after being found guilty on 34 counts, according to Snap Daily Mail poll. Trump talked about that this morning. He was very positive. He's not intimidated. He's not scared. He's not going to be silenced. Many of the articles covering Donald Trump's comments from yesterday point out that Trump said, buckle up, which is funny because on today's date in 2020, exactly 4 years ago, there was a post on an anonymous message board that people pay a lot of attention to that says in the post, buckle up. Here we go. And obviously, I know that's just a weird coincidence that 4 years ago, an anonymous account who virtually everybody understands is associated with Trump in some way posted buckle up. And now we have Trump spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt saying buckle up, pointing out the fact that Joe Biden and the rest of these communists had Donald Trump all tied up in this courtroom. But now he's going to go back and hit the campaign trail. And how's that going to look? Will he keep heading into enemy territory, showing that he has bigger crowds than ever? He's more popular than ever, including with every single segment of what used to be the Democrat base? Yeah, we're probably going to see that. We're going to see rallies bigger than they've ever been before. We're 4 weeks away from the debate. 2 weeks after that will be Donald Trump's sentencing. And a few days later, the Republican National Convention begins. But among all of the responses and all of the coverage I've seen, I don't think anything boils it down so succinctly as Steve Bannon right here.
A lot of this is information warfare. A lot of this is psyops. And a lot of it is to regenerate the strength of the controlled opposition.
And there it is. That's what we've been talking about for all this time. This is information warfare and psychological operations. A lot of it is being done to energize the controlled opposition. And what is that controlled opposition? What is the dynamic he's referring to right now? It's that the system is legitimate. Yes, it's a dark day, but we must move forward. The controlled opposition accepts all of that as given, encourages you to feel an emotional response. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you scared or intimidated? And then it asks you to subscribe to one of their proposed solutions on how to move forward. Do you hope for Donald Trump to go to prison? Do you push for him to be replaced on the Republican ticket? Do you encourage Republican attorneys general and district attorneys to pursue their own political prosecutions? All of those answers are just fine. The central narrative is down with whatever in that set of ideas you choose to associate with. Just don't step outside the controlled opposition dynamic. The controlled opposition dynamic is where the answer always is, which is why the regime and its uniparty and its media want everyone to affirm the legitimacy of the system and the reality of this result. If you accept the legitimacy of the system, they will offer you any brand of response you choose, and they will provide incentives for your compliance. They will also tell you what happens if you don't comply, what happens if you attempt to step outside that controlled opposition dynamic, and maybe get down to the actual truth, and maybe summon the courage to express it, and maybe even express it to other people who might then be convinced. I'm not uncovering some deep, dark secret. They tell you in their own words. The task now is to argue for the legitimacy of the system and make sure that Trump and his allies don't find a way to undercut this verdict to the point where people might choose to abandon that system completely, to come out and realize en masse that the entire thing is corrupted. We are getting closer and closer to that point, and we need to be at that point for when people are faced with the irrefutable fact that Joe Biden did not receive 81 million real lawful American votes. We continue to move closer to that point on the timeline and get people mentally and emotionally closer to the point of being able to accept it when that time arrives. And it sucks that it requires so much shock therapy. It shouldn't be this way, and we should do everything we can to make sure it never gets this way again. But for now, while it is necessary, we're going to have to find a way to be happy about it, because more eyes opened yesterday than have in a long time. The goal is the mass cultural awakening. It's always been that. With that, all these problems can be solved. Without it, virtually none of them can. If you want the process to end sooner, then the awakening must accelerate. And nothing accelerates the awakening more than these sorts of shocks to the system. Was yesterday a dark day? I mean, I guess maybe. It's a little disappointing that so many people fall for this stuff at all. I guess we can have that reaffirmed. But was it darker than the day before, or the day before that, or the day before that? Things are accelerating powerfully in our direction. Don't give these people an inch. Make them go crazy. Make them show who they are. Let them know that however much they convince themselves Trump and MAGA would finally go away if Trump was convicted, it's never, ever, ever going to happen. So buckle up, because there are quite a few more shocks to come. I'll be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under a quarter per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's happening!